Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of 22 at the Lips. This is the podcast from EMS providers to EMS providers and anybody and everybody in between. Today, I wanted to do kind of like a mini episode of not anything particularly educational, not anything that's really, I would even go as far as to say revolutionary, something that I just have near and dear to my heart and something that I feel like is a big aspect in EMS as a whole. A big part of signing up for this job is, aside from the obvious, the pay, aside from your scheduled hours, whether you work 12s or 24s, besides knowing that you're going to work holidays, besides knowing that you're going to work in any weather condition, et cetera, the things you see, the things you smell, the things you hear, a big part of this job is your partner. It is the partnership. Whether you have a permanent partner, whether you're with somebody different, I would even go as far as to say every single shift. If you're like on that weird flex schedule, you have to know how to be able to work with other people. You can be the smartest medic or EMT in the entire industry that you work in. But if you're not able to work with a partner and work with them well, you're not going to be the best provider that you can be, because having a good partnership goes beyond just the cab talk in the ambulance. It goes beyond having a good time on shift. So, in whole, your partner and how you treat each other and the various amount of people that you work with, it can make or break this entire job. Because with your partner, you both go through things that most people don't go through. You go through events and calls that sometimes at the end of the call, you literally have to sit there and look at each other and ask, "Hey, are you okay?" Or you have those moments where you could only just laugh after a call with your partner, not at a patient, but just the situation, and look at each other and say, "You can't make this up." So it's that closeness of your partner. It's also the fact that you're 6 feet apart inside of this ambulance, or, I mean, even in an aircraft for hours on end. And you spend a lot of time with them. And sometimes you spend more time with them than even some of your family members. And on top of that, you miss events, you miss life events, you miss birthday parties, you miss holidays. So your partnership, like I said, it can make or break this job, and it can make or break your experience in this entire field. And another thing that I think is really beautiful about these partnerships is that every partnership is dynamic. I have been so spoiled in this field because I've had some of the best partners on this planet, hands down. And you may be thinking to yourself, Alexis, I don't know, because I've had really good partners. I'm willing to bet my partners have been better. But every partnership is dynamic. Certain things that I vibe well with one partner are different than how I vibe with a different partner. Or some partners like certain types of music, and other partners hate that type of music. Certain partners do things one way on calls and they run their call with one aspect of fluidity, but another type of partner doesn't do it like that. So it's kind of that beautiful jujitsu of learning other people and their quirks and their sense of humor and what they like and what they don't like. And if you're not an extrovert, you're not going to do well in this field. I'll just say that outright, but that's besides the point. So, with all of this, I wanted to give a couple of my personal anecdotes and things that I feel like make you a good partner, because it's based on my experience. It's based on what I've seen in other people, and I want to implement to my partners as well. Just different things that you can learn along the way. And I would love for the listeners, for if you're on the YouTube channel, if you're watching, if you want to chime in and add something that I didn't say, please add it in, because it's going to make me better and it's going to make everybody else better. So, the most important one, and I cannot highlight this one enough: have good hygiene. Do not show up to your shift smelling like a bag of Doritos or pulling your shirt out of your back seat and it's wrinkled and I mean showing up and you've got dog hair and cat hair on your uniform pants or your boots are all muddy or again you smell bad. Like this is just me. One time back in the agency where I worked 24 hours per shift, I pulled up another 24-hour shift right after that one. So it's a 48 straight. I did not have time to go home and shower in between those shifts. And the shift that I was going to at that station, it did not have a shower. So instead of showing up smelling like the shift before, I stopped at a gas station and took a shower. I'm not saying you have to do that. It's a little extreme, but if you need to, it is better than going to a shift smelling bad and looking like you just rolled out of the bed. You don't have to look like you're dressed to the nines. You don't have to be whatever, but just look clean, look professional. I mean, you can take it to the extent that how you look on calls, you're a walking billboard for the agency that you work at, and you're a representation of the standard that they uphold in that agency. And if you look bad, it makes your agency look bad. And you may think to yourself, oh, well, I'm not a huge fan of this agency. I'm switching to another agency or whatever it is. But you're still wearing the uniform. Another thing, and it may not affect your exact partnership that you're going to on that shift, but being a good partner is also the shifts that you're relieving or the shifts that if you're picking up overtime, you're new to that area, whatever, show up on time. I would even go as far as to say that if you're on time, you're late. You need to show up early, one, for your relief so they can go home because what goes around comes around. And if you're known as the person that's not on time for every single shift, people are going to pick up on that. And maybe if they're petty enough, they're not going to be on time for you either. So just show up early, show up at a decent, reasonable amount of time before your shift because it gives you that time to ask the crews, like, hey, what kind of calls did you guys have? Or, hey, did you run into this patient? Because we all know our frequent flyers, but it also gives you time to do your checkoffs. It gives you time to check the inventory, that kind of stuff, all the preliminaries that you need to do before your shift even starts. Another aspect, and this one isn't directly related to your ability to do your job, but be able to pick out what to eat, whether it's breakfast, whether it's lunch, whether it's dinner, if you didn't bring your own food or whatever it is, be able to pick out what to eat. Even if, like I do to my partners, they'll be like, hey, what do you want to grab for lunch? Or what kind of snack should we get? I look at them and I say, all right, let's narrow this down to three options and we'll go from there. Because the whole like, oh, I don't care. Well, great. Me either. And we're still hungry. And if we don't decide soon, we're about to catch a call. So being able to pick out what to eat, it's not a make or break aspect of a partnership, but gosh golly, does it help? This is another one I hold near and dear to my heart. Be someone who goes through and does their truck inventory and their cabinet inventory, their bag inventory, whatever you want to call it, and restocks. That pause was intentional because for the people in the back, be someone who helps truck inventory and check off and restocking. You don't want to be that crew that whenever someone else relieves y'all, they already know, like, oh, we're going to have to restock every single thing. You also don't want to be the crew that when you show up for your shift, you have that mindset that like, oh, everything's good because it was this crew. We're good. Because they may have forgotten something. If you don't do your inventory, you're only hurting yourselves. This is kind of more in the aspect of like just being a good employee or a good provider in general. But I have had those calls where I got entirely too trustworthy of the crew that I was relieving and I didn't do my inventory. And wouldn't you know, on a certain call, I needed that certain thing and I didn't have it. And guess who suffers? not the crew that I relieved, me and my partner, because now we're up a creek without a paddle. And kind of on that note as well, be the partner who helps your partner clean up the truck after every single call. Don't automatically, because it was your call and now you have a report to write, don't automatically go to the front and start cranking out that report. Take the 5 minutes to go help your partner. Nobody should be stuck cleaning all the wires from the EKG leads or cleaning the stretcher. Or I'm not saying you got to mop after every single call. If you do, like, kudos, more power to you. But just keeping the truck presentable, but also helping your partner do that. Personal anecdote, I worked as an EMT. I worked with a medic who told me day one, as my basic, your job is to clean up after me and carry my stuff. Sir, it was miserable to work with that man. It was miserable to run calls with him. And I hated my job for 2 weeks straight while I worked with this guy. Hated my job. I was dreading going to work, and it completely sucked the fire and the passion out of me. So just being a decent person and lending a hand, even if it's your call, like on scene, grabbing some bags instead of making your partner do the whole thing by themselves. This one's kind of dependent on the agency that you work at and how the dynamic goes for who drives during what calls. But if you are the one who is driving to the hospital while going lights and sirens or driving to a call going lights and sirens, please drive well. Number one, don't be a bully on the road. And I mean, you do have to sometimes kind of coerce people into moving, but don't be a bully and ride up on people behind their bumper. You're going to cause a wreck, whether you're going to wreck the ambulance or you're going to cause somebody else to get in a wreck. And then that's a whole other call for somebody else. But also, if you're going code, which means with the license sirens, on the way to a call or on the way to the ER, and you're asking yourself, I wonder if I'm throwing my partner around in the back. You probably are. And if you're in the back, you know this is not a good experience because one, you're already going lights and sirens, which kind of amps up that adrenaline dump. You're already probably doing five other things at the same time and then being thrown around, trying not to fall on a patient, trying not to fall to the ground, trying to stay strapped to the bench seat. It is a miserable place to be, and you just get flustered and frustrated. Sometimes if you're the one in the back, it doesn't hurt to kind of coach your partner like, "Hey, I know, we were really amped up on this call, but next time take it a little slower around the curves." Or if you're the one who was doing the driving and somebody comments on your ability to drive, take it with stride and actually listen and reflect on that because I personally, and I'm sure many other people can attest to this, I've been the one who was thrown around in the back, and I got thrown so hard, I hit my head, and my poor patient kinda looked back and was like, as his arm is, like, hanging off the stretcher, I was trying to splint it on the way to the hospital. He turns around, he looks at me, he's like, "Hey, bro, you good?" And I was kinda seeing stars for a second, and I'm like, "Yeah, let's bandage up that arm, my guy." Like, that looks bad on us, and it's poor patient care because then I'm not able to do my job properly. So, like, no matter who's driving, no matter if you're going to a call, going to the hospital, drive with due regard. Another aspect, be competent. I'm not saying you have to be the smartest person on the truck, but having some decency and wherewithal within yourself to know that, like, I need to be able to do my job with skill and knowledge and do it well. One, it helps your partner because they can trust you to be able to do things, but also it helps you as a provider. And again, whether you work with the same partner or not, you can kind of build on each other on certain skills and interventions and treatment aspects and stuff like that. And you can also take that a step further and in your partnership, keep each other educated. I personally find something every single shift to kind of review, and I'll review it with my partner, or we'll watch a couple of YouTube videos on how to do a surgical crike and what to do, how to do it. Or different skills and even scenarios, just things that like you go to this kind of call with this patient and this happened. What's your first step? Okay, then what are you going to do? It keeps each other sharp, and if you so happen to run into that situation, you kind of already have a pregame of what you're going to do. Again, helping each other, and the ultimate goal, helping the patient, because that's why we sign up for the job. So I didn't number these, but I guess this would be number 7-ish. But be someone who doesn't complain going to calls. Don't be that person that every time you get a call, you hear, "Oh god, here we go." It's literally your job to go to calls. And I fully understand when you've been running back to back and you get that one other call and it feels like, "Oh my gosh, when is this gonna stop?" You can have those moments. You can have that kinda griping moment of, "Oh, it's dispatch, they hate us," which is not true, but or that moment where you're like, "Oh god, this is gonna be such a stupid call, blah, 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 blah," based on the notes, but number 1, the notes are not always correct, and number 2, you really don't know. Me and my partner recently had a call that we were complaining on the way to the call based on the notes, and we get there, and it was something else completely and utterly not that. So we stopped complaining about going to calls that we were convinced are absolutely ridiculous. And also, don't judge a patient on why they call 911. And this next part kind of ties into the idea of like keeping each other educated. Be able to say when you don't know something, whether it's, again, a good important reason of why you should do your checkoffs every morning. If you don't know what something is, point it out to your partner and say, "Hey, when do we use this?" Or, "Hey, when do you want this medication on a call?" Or, I mean, even you can go as far as to say it helps with the terminology of certain tools in the toolbox that we have, because what you may call the glucometer Landsets, I call them the glucometer pokey things, just because when I say Lancet, I think of Lancelot from King Arthur, which has nothing to do with anything, but that's just me. And so whenever I'm going through and I tell my partner, "Hey, we need some more glucometer pokey things," she looks at me and she's like, "Somewhat?" And I'm like, "The Lancets." And then we get to a call and I tell her, "Hey, pass me a glucometer pokey thing." It just helps with that terminology and it helps each other. Like I said, if you don't know something, it kind of mitigates that aspect of avoiding going to a call and your partner looks at you and says, "Hey, can you set up a neb treatment?" And you look around, you're like, "Oh, I don't know how to do that." Or, "Hey, can you get the Narcan ready?" And you don't know how to do it. It mitigates that on the scene embarrassment and ultimately, again, the patient care. You can even take this a step further and having the wherewithal within yourself to say when you don't know something. For instance, as a paramedic, we know how to run 12 leads, we know how to read 12 leads, and we would know what to do with bad 12 leads, more or less. But we had a patient that I ran a 12 lead on, and I saw what it looked like, and I couldn't pinpoint that exact moment what it was, but I looked at my partner and I said, "I need to do a phone a friend real quick." And after the call, she was like, "Why what were you struggling with that 12 lead?" And I showed her, and then I showed her what a normal 12 lead looks like, and she was like, "Oh, yeah, that's different." And I said, "Yeah, I I haven't enough within myself to put my pride aside and FaceTime somebody and say, 'Hey, this is the type of patient we have,' not giving away personal patient information, but we have a 56-year-old female, and this is what the 12 lead looks like. This is her complaint, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera." And having that humility to ask somebody else. And again, it goes back to if you don't know how to do a skill, if you don't know what certain things are, being able to stand up for yourself and say that. And as somebody on the receiving end of that information, being kind enough and being a teacher in that moment and saying, "Oh, okay," instead of getting mad, being able to say, "All right, well, we're going to work on that real quick." So I only have about 3 more points, but I feel like they tie in closely together. The first one is the idea that arrogance has no place in EMS. If you're that partner that always has to be right, if you're that partner that, or even just in general, if you're a provider who's arrogant and thinks that they are the best thing since sliced cheese, you can get off the truck. And with that, it's the idea that there's no boss on the box. Sure, you have your different level providers, different years of experience, but if you have the mindset that you're the only one who can do certain things and you're better because of it, you're going to affect your partnership because your partner will not respect you for it. And in that idea, respect is a two-way street. You get it if you give it, and vice versa. So if your partner doesn't respect you, they're not they're not going to treat you the way that maybe you think that you deserve. And vice versa. If your partner is that person that's arrogant and always has to be right and treats you like trash because they think they're better than you, you're not going to give them that right amount of respect. And it just goes back to the idea of being a teammate. You have to have each other's backs. A little personal anecdote. I had just started working with a paramedic who was new to the company that I was at. And at that time, for whatever reason, he didn't have his badge yet. And it was like our first shift together. So we end up going to our headquarters building, and there's a bunch of higher ups and everybody, everybody's watching everybody kind of thing, just because you're at headquarters, whatever. But he didn't have his badge. And I found out later that we were actually going there to get it. So we walk in, we're both professional looking, we're dressed to the nines, we look great. And one of the higher up supervisors looks at my partner, says, "Hey man, where's your badge?" I thought he was serious. I didn't know he was joking. So I look at that supervisor and I'm like, "Oh, no, no, no. He has it. It's just in the truck." Was that badge in the truck? No. Did I have my partner's back? Absolutely. I'm not saying you have to be ride or die and, like, you know, take the blame for something for your partner if it's not your fault at all. But being able to stand up for your partner, because on some calls, you both may be the only advocate for one another, or everything is hitting the fan, and you're able to kind of have that wherewithal to look at your partner and say, "We've got this." Or you're going into a situation or a call and you may struggle with that certain population, or you may struggle with that certain demographic and age range and whatever it is, but knowing that you both have each other to kind of lean on each other, it helps tremendously. And like I said, the next couple of aspects blend together. So with that idea of having each other's backs and being supportive, you should have an ability to listen and to not judge, whether it's your partner's going over call and they were saying like, "Oh, I just feel like I could have done this better," or I mean, we carry our personal lives into this job. And I'm not saying you have to bleed your heart out and make your partner your personal therapist, but being able to, one, be the partner that can listen and not judge your partner based on what they're saying. And on the receiving end, listen to what your partner's saying and not judge them. You should be truthful. You should be trustworthy, be approachable. You should be loyal, be compassionate, be supportive. And my last little point is be coachable, because again, the partnership deals with, you're going to calls, you're going to patients' houses, you're picking patients up, you're running cardiac arrest codes, you're going through these traumatic events. And sometimes the call may not run as smoothly as you thought it would. And there are certain aspects where maybe things could have run a little bit smoother. Being able to be coachable enough to take that hard criticism and slash or being able to give it without sounding condescending is so crucial. So I've given a lot of do this and do that and don't be like this or be like this. But how do we make it applicable? And it's hard to say this, but it depends on your partnership. What I personally do is when I'm going into a shift with somebody I haven't worked with before, I say, "All right, two things we need to cover before we do everything and anything." I say, number one, I am geographically challenged. I struggle getting places, and I mean, it's embarrassing to say that, but also I work in the same city that I have lived in for 20 something years of my life, and I still get lost on the way to calls. I don't know how it happens. I don't know why it happens. I cannot create the map in my head of our area for whatever reason. So I kind of just let my partner know, like, I'm going to need a little bit of coaching on how to drive places. And 9 times out of 10, I have a good partner that because I give them respect and I listen to what they say and I treat them like a teammate in our partnership, they don't get mad when we're on the way to a call and they're like, "Oh, yeah, yeah, this is that address we went to last week." And I look at them and I say, "Okay, how do I get there?" Or we're driving to a post that we've gone to 3 times that day and I still ask, "Do I turn left or right?" They don't get mad because, again, respect, two-way street. We're being there for each other. The second thing I say is, I am deathly allergic to strawberries and raspberries, and if I eat them or I come in contact with them, I will die within 5 minutes. If you don't have that thing, congratulations. But also, it kind of breaks the ice because it's like, oh, okay, well, we won't have that. And then I'm like, yeah, I'd rather not die on shift. And then you can create fluid conversation. But another thing I've done is I've pulled up the 20 questions game and literally just go down the rabbit hole of it sounds dumb, but like the rabbit hole of just getting to know that other person. What do you like to do outside of work? And you get to know more about that person. Or my favorite one is, what's your favorite color and why? It sounds dumb, but if nothing else, it helps you create conversation. And when you can create that conversation, when you are able to get along with the person that you're working with, if nothing else, aside from having the good patient care, which is the ultimate goal, aside from being able to know that person, all of that, it makes the shift enjoyable and you can get through it, if nothing else. So I know I threw a lot out there, but if I miss something, please, by all means, leave a comment, send me an email, let me know. So that's all I got. My advice is be a good partner and be a good provider for your patient because again, that partnership dynamic bleeds into calls. That's all I got. So with that,
The 22 at the Lips podcast is designed to support, not replace, the relationship that exists between a practitioner and his or her medical director. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the host, guest, and not necessarily of Master Medics. The information provided during this podcast is intended for educational and informational purposes only. It is not a substitute for your approved protocols.